Hey folks, welcome back to the kitchen here at Markelly Farm. It's a cold, blustery day outside here in central Nebraska. So it's a good day to do some indoor stuff. So we're going to attack those tomatoes that we've had in the freezer that we've been accumulating over the summer. And we're going to get them canned up. So if you want to learn how to do that, stick around. We'll show you. So here's all of our tomatoes we were gathering in the freezer. And if you remember, before we put them in the freezer, we cored them, scored the bottoms of them, and then put them in these 2-gallon Ziploc bags. We have 6 of those, so about 12 gallons here of tomatoes. So we're going to start getting these out of the bag, and we'll show you how easy they are to peel, and then we'll get our cooker out and get them going. So we've been having some significant weather here in our area, which gives me a little break from harvest because we've been full swing with harvest for a few weeks now. And last night and yesterday afternoon, areas close by here got 8 inches of rain. We were on the southern end of it, only got about 2 inches. But the land around here in central Nebraska sheds the water off pretty darn fast, so it wasn't a huge problem. So we went out and retrieved our cooker out in the garage. This is the main reason we wanted one of these cookers. I believe my mother-in-law Linda got this for us. So we've got the pan out of it over here. We're going to start taking our tomatoes out of the bag, peeling them and throwing them in this pan. So we've got our tomatoes thawed out, and we'll show you people when they normally do tomatoes, you have to put them in boiling water for about a minute or so and shock them, and then put them in ice cold water to get the skins to lift. We have frozen these, and it makes pretty much the same effect. You see how those skins just slip right off of the tomatoes? And there's your skins. That's pretty much all it takes. So it takes that step out of it. So we're going to go ahead and do that to all these tomatoes. Not all of them are thawed out because we had them in a big pile here in the sink. So some of them have stayed frozen. So as these thaw, we'll keep throwing them here in the pan. Now we've accumulated these tomatoes over the summer. If you remember, our tomatoes, our Roma tomatoes, were kind of hit and miss. So we were able to get some from other farmers in the area. One of them being our friend Natalia, who you saw in a video the other day. She gave us some of her Roma tomatoes because she had more than enough for what she was doing. So we thank all the people that helped us out this year to get some tomatoes in the root cellar, because it wasn't going to be a very good year because of that hailstorm we got early on. So we'll keep doing this, and we'll bring you back once we have all these in the pan here. All right, it's later on in the evening. The tomatoes were taking forever to thaw out, so I had to pull them out of the sink and lay them out on the counter to get them to thaw out. And then we went to a football game this afternoon, so I came back and everything was ready to go. So this is all of our skins here in this bowl. This is all of our pulp from our tomatoes, and you can see our 6 empty bags over here. Now the bags, once they thaw out, they'll be full of the clear tomato liquid. What I would do is I would just pierce a hole in the bottom of that bag, let that go down the sink. And then you see this liquid over here, this kind of clear tomato juice over here. That's what you're trying to cook out of your tomatoes when you're making tomato sauce or whatever you're doing. And that's what takes so long, is to cook that liquid out to where you just end up with the meaty portion of the tomato. So by freezing this, it acts a lot like cooking. You're breaking down the cellular structure of the tomato to where it breaks it down into skins and pulp and juice. So we can pour off this juice and just work with the pulp of the tomato and save a lot of time, especially with these paste tomatoes or the Roma tomatoes, because there's not a lot of pulp in them to start with. So we're starting with almost a finished product when we start heating this up. Now from this point, you've got several different ways you can go. Once you get this liquid poured off, you can heat this mixture up and then can that as like whole tomatoes. Or you can crush these with your hands and then heat them up and then can them, and then you have crushed tomatoes. You can crush them up and add tomatoes and peppers and make like a stewed tomato. You got to be careful with stewed tomatoes because you're lowering the acid. So you may have to pressure can the stewed tomatoes if you don't have enough acid. You can always add lemon juice to bring your acid back up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to cook this pulp down, break it down even more, and then we're going to put our immersion blender in here and kind of make a tomato sauce. Now if you want to go even further, you can cook this down to where almost all of the moisture is out of it, and you'll end up with like a tomato paste, a really thick mixture. You'll cook this down to like halfway again. So you can see from our 6 bags of tomatoes, we have our roaster maybe half full. So instead of cooking this down by half, we're basically already there. So let's get this drained off and we'll put it back in its base over there, and we'll start heating this stuff up. Okay, we got our tomatoes drained, got our base back together here. We've set it on about 250 degrees, which is well above the boiling temperature. So we're going to let this cook some more of the moisture out. We'll puree it, and then we will put it into jars. Now, some of you people will cringe at the fact that I dumped that juice down the drain, but it either goes down the drain or it comes out as steam and vaporizes here into the house. So I'd rather have it go into the drain. So let's get the lid on it. We'll get the cooking process started. The other reason I like using these cookers is because they heat from the outside and not from the bottom, where you're going to be scorching everything in here and get a big burnt spot on the bottom. Alright, here's the progress of our tomatoes. They're looking good. Still not quite up to a simmer yet. So it's 11:30 at night, and we don't want to stay up all night canning these tomatoes. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to turn our cooker down to about 150 degrees. We're going to let this go, and we're going to go to bed, and we'll come back in the morning and get ready to can these tomatoes up. All right, folks, good morning. We are back at it. Tomatoes are looking good. We're going to jack our heat back up. Let's go to about 300 today. So we've stirred it around a little bit, created a little pocket in the middle. You can see how the liquid pools here in the middle. We still want to cook some of that out. So we're going to continue to cook this. We're going to bring it up to a simmer. We're not too far away, though. You can see the consistency here. And then we'll get our immersion blender in here. We'll puree this up, and then we'll start filling our jars. So we're going to go down into the root cellar and gather up our jars and stuff that we need, and we'll get our canner going and get things ready. All right, folks, we got our water bath canner out. We've got 8 jars in here. I'm assuming 8 jars is going to do it. And we've got our water up to our final height that we need. It's a little trick that I do. So when you pull a full jar of water out, I dump it in the sink, and then I put a full jar of tomatoes back in. The water height stays the same. And if it does happen to change a little bit, we can just dump some of the water out of one of the jars in here. So we don't have to have another pot on the stove boiling water to top this thing up when we're ready to go start the canning process. The jars that we're using are Anchor Hocking jars. I don't know if it's the same in your area, but Ball and Kerr don't seem to be keeping up with the demand. So other brands of jars are poking up on the market. The brand that's being pushed out on the homestead community now, you'll see a lot of people advertising for them. They're made in China. These are made in the good old USA. I can't support anything that's made in China because of the slave labor. The only thing that I don't like about these jars is there's no markings on them. So sometimes you'll say, hey, maybe that's a mayonnaise jar or something, but you can tell by the shape that it's a canning jar. So that's what we use. Our tomatoes are looking good over here. I think we're about time to get the immersion blender in here. They're looking pretty thick. What we're looking for, that's about the consistency we want. So once everything's heated up and ready to go, we'll start canning. Okay, we're getting ready to take this for a spin with our immersion blender. Now, you don't have to do this step. If you were to can the tomatoes just like this, you'd be like a crushed tomato consistency. You'd be just fine. But Kelly is not a big tomato fan. She'll eat things, obviously, with tomatoes in them, or tomato products. But she doesn't want to come upon a big chunk of tomato like that, because she doesn't like the texture. But she loves spaghetti sauce, and we make chili and stuff like that, so she's fine with tomatoes. Just a texture thing for her. So we're going to give this a spin and smooth this out for Kelly. Alright, I think that's going to do it, folks. You can see how everything's a lot more smooth and consistent, but it's not an absolute complete puree. And that's what we were looking for. I absolutely love these immersion blenders. It's so nice to be able to get into the pot and not have to dump everything in a blender carafe and then dump it back out and create that big mess. So we like them so much, and we're going to celebrate the fact that we are now over 8,000 subscribers on this channel. We're going to give an immersion blender away. And the only thing you have to do, if you don't have one and you want one, put a comment on this video. And then out of all those people that comment, how I'm going to choose the winner of that is I'm going to choose the person that's the most active on the channel and has had the most comments, and you're going to get that blender. So get your comments down there if you want one. Okay, our canner's right on the verge of boiling, so we're probably going to get started filling jars. So let's get her done. Now about halfway through our jar, when we get it filled up, we'll put a full teaspoon of salt and a half a teaspoon of citric acid in our jar. And then I just take like a little chopstick, stir that up a little bit to get it incorporated into the tomatoes, so they're just not a big clump of it. And then we fill the jar the rest of the way. Now, of course, for pint jars, you would cut all those measurements in half. You'd put a half a teaspoon of salt and a quarter teaspoon of your citric acid, or 1 teaspoon of lemon juice. We got all of our jars filled. We ended up with 5.5 quarts. Here's our little half quart. I just threw in a jar that we had here on the counter. We'll put that in the fridge, and we'll use it up in a recipe here real soon. We put a half a teaspoon of salt and a quarter teaspoon of our citric acid also in this little jar. Now this is found in your aisle at the store by all your canning stuff. It just brings the acidity of your tomatoes up to where they're safe to can. If you don't have this, you can use 2 teaspoons of lemon juice in its place. Here's our jars inside of our canner. We left the empty jars in there just to kind of keep things spaced out. Now if you have hard water like we do, dump in about a cup of vinegar into your canner, and that will keep your jars from turning white with that hard water. Alright, we're going to put our lid on our canner. We're starting to boil here. Once we get into a rolling boil, we'll start our timer. Now, pint jars would go for 40 minutes at sea level. Our quart jars like we have would go for 45, but because we're at our elevation that we are going to go for 50 minutes for the quart. Now we got our tomato skins over here left over from the process. I have heard of people freeze drying these and turning them into tomato powder, but never tried it. Maybe one of these days when we can afford the crazy expense of a freeze dryer, we'll try that. Now here on the homestead, we can tomatoes just plain with a little bit of salt, and that enables us to take those tomatoes to anywhere we want to go. We can make any recipe, and I have many recipes designed around 1 quart jar of tomatoes. If you commit to like spaghetti sauce or something like that, it's hard to use that for other things. So keep it plain and you can go anywhere. Now that's not to say we haven't done stuff before. We've made ketchup before because we use a lot of ketchup. And I have made some sloppy joe sauce because it's a really quick and easy meal. You can just dump a pint jar in with a pound of hamburger and you're good to go. You got a meal very quick. But generally we stick with just plain tomatoes. Now, if at the end of the year we got a bumper crop of tomatoes the next year and we have a lot of tomatoes left in the cupboard, we can take last year's tomatoes, dump them out of the jar, and make some other items with those, like the ketchup or the sloppy joe sauce, and that's what we did. Break those quart jars down into pint jars, and then you have that whole new crop of tomatoes coming into your root cellar to replace them. Okay, our time has elapsed. We'll turn our burner off. We're going to remove the lid. And then we're going to let these jars sit uncovered for about 10 minutes or so before we remove them. Alright folks, there's our beautiful canned tomatoes. Check that out. Love that color. Okay, we got our tomatoes down to the pantry. We probably got enough tomatoes there for this year. But next year we want to fill this whole thing full of tomatoes. We use about 20 quarts of tomatoes per year, it seems like. So again, that'll get us through this year. Here's the rest of our pantry. We've done pretty good this season getting things done. We've got a lot of our stuff here, our peaches and apples and pears and corn and beef stew. Got all our beans that we can down here. Got some carrots. We've got some potatoes. We've got some pickled onions down here, and then some canned butternut squash down there from last year. We've still got plenty of pickles, so we're doing good. We've got our zucchini relish that we use a lot of, all our jams and jellies here, all of our peppers and corn relish that we made right there. That's my brother's recipe. Our hatch chilies that we canned up, our green taco sauce that we made out of our green tomatoes last year, or sweet Thai chili sauce that we make. Got all of our butternuts and acorns and our onions down here. We've got Kelly's vinegar. This is my wine vinegar back here. 1 jar of tomato juice from last year. 2 jars left of my hot sauce that I made. Chicken broth, turkey broth, bone broth. Lots more cranberries. We have some store-bought items that we store down here in bulk that we get from California. And then you've probably seen all of our canning supplies before. Some of our catering supplies that we have up here. So that's the pantry. I'm pretty proud of the work we've done this year. We've only got one more thing to can, and then we'll be done. All right, folks, we got our tomatoes canned and put in the root cellar. We've been wanting to do that for about a month now, so I'm glad we finally got that done. Another thing checked off the list. We're going to be planting a whole row of Roma tomatoes next year because we want to fill that pantry up. Now, we started with about a 5-gallon bucket, I would say, of the whole ripe fresh tomatoes, and that gave us about 5.5 quarts of canned tomatoes. So that kind of gives you a ratio, maybe about a gallon of fresh tomatoes will give you about a quart of canned tomatoes. So kind of a good reference there. So until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. We love you guys. Come back and see us here at Markelly Farm. We've got lots to do.